Hi there, this is Cody Neal, and this is my final presentation of the Synoptic Gospels course with Pathways Training in 2025. In this presentation, I'd like to cover the synoptic meaning, which Gospels are considered a synoptic gospel, take a description or a deeper dive into each book and see who wrote them, who the author wrote them to, why they wrote them, when it was written, and the percentage of that gospel that can be found in the other synoptic gospels. And then we'll wrap things up looking at the Gospel of John. So let's dive in and get started here. What does synoptic mean? The word synoptic means presenting the same view or of the same eye. And if you've ever read the Gospels before, you'll notice that there are events, miracles, teachings that are recorded in different books or different gospels. For example, the birth of Jesus. The birth of Jesus can be found in Matthew and Luke. So there are things that happen in the synoptic gospels that are recorded because it's presenting the same view or of the same eye. So that's what the word synoptic means. So which gospels are synoptic? That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I know what you're probably thinking, but what about John? And don't worry, at the end of this presentation, we're going to dive in and see why John is not considered a synoptic gospel. So let's start with Matthew, the book of Matthew. Who wrote the book of Matthew and who is Matthew? So the book itself is anonymous. However, most scholars do believe that the book of Matthew was written by the disciple, the tax collector, the disciple of Jesus. And the reason that they think that is because of the Jewish perspective on Jesus's life and ministry. So who Matthew wrote this to? Well, it was to the Jewish community. And why? It was to prove that Jesus was who he said he was, and he wanted to prove to the Jewish community that he was the long awaited Messiah. And he used a lot of prophecies and references to the Old Testament. So when we read Matthew, we're going to notice that he uses a lot of Old Testament references and prophecies. It was written between 50 and 70 AD, and approximately 58% of the material found in Matthew can also be found in Mark and Luke. So on to Mark's Gospel. Mark is considered to be the first gospel, and we're going to find out in just a moment why. So, who was Mark? Mark was a disciple and an interpreter for Peter, one of the disciples. So, who he wrote it to? He wrote it not only to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. And the reason he did that was because he wanted to preserve the life of Jesus to believers facing persecutions. And he used eyewitness accounts, especially from Peter, since he was an interpreter and a disciple of Peter. So the first century church was facing terrible persecution, and Mark used his gospel to encourage those believers that were facing that persecution. It's said that Mark is said to believe that it's written between 55 and 70 AD. And here's the biggest reason why most believe that Mark was considered the first gospel, and it's because 90 to 95% of the material found in Mark is also found in Matthew and Luke. So it's said that Matthew and Luke used Mark as a reference, but also used a resource known as Q, which could have been oral traditions, oral teachings going around the first century church, or possibly a letter that was circulating through the first century church to write their gospels. So again, that percentage, that high percentage that's found in Matthew and Luke, is why most believe that Mark was the first gospel written. So on to the Gospel of Luke. Who was Luke? Well, Luke was a physician and a companion of the Apostle Paul, and he had the opportunity to interview eyewitnesses and meet the disciples themselves. And a cool fact, too, is that he also wrote the book of Acts. So, who he wrote it to, when we read the first couple verses of the book of Luke, we'll notice that he mentions a man, Theophilus. And of course, I'm paraphrasing here. He's like, hey, Theophilus, I'm writing this, I'm recording this so that you may come and believe and encourage you to know that Jesus is who he said he was. So, Theophilus was a man of wealth and high social status. So it's believed that Theophilus also helped fund Luke with his research mission, so that way that he had the resources needed to go and interview these eyewitnesses and to record his gospel. So why he wrote it? Well, not only did he write it to Theophilus, but he wanted to give a true historical account of Jesus' life. So you can kind of say that Luke was a history buff, and he wanted to write this not only to Theophilus, but he also wanted to write this for other Gentiles that were new to their faith, to give them a firm foundation as to who Jesus was with that true historical account. It's said that Luke was written before 62 AD, and the percentage that's found in Matthew and Mark is around 40%. So when we take into account these percentages that of each gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke and how they are found in each of those three, that's exactly why they are a synoptic gospel. It's of the same viewpoint, it's of the same eye, and that they are recording the same events and miracles and teachings of Jesus. So, but hey, what about John? Why isn't John considered a synoptic? And there are a few reasons why John is not considered a synoptic. And the first one is because his writing style is really different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. His is less of a narrative of Jesus' life and his ministry. And his material was really unique because he uses I am statements, such as Jesus saying, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, that's found in John 14, 1 through 7. He says that I am the resurrection and the life, that's found in John 11, 21 through 27. And then lastly, he says, I am the light of the world, that's found in John 8, verse 12. So he also uses accounts such as the Samaritan woman at the well, the wedding at Cana, and the raising of Lazarus. So these accounts here are found in John. So who was he? Well, it's still debated, but it's nailed down to two Johns. Some believe that it was written by John, the son of Zebedee, so one of the disciples, or a man known as John the Elder, who was an elder of the first century church. So why he wrote it? He wanted to provide a theological account of Jesus' life, affirming that Jesus' deity by recording his miracles and his words. So his words, the I am statements referenced earlier, and his miracles, such as the miracle at the wedding at Cana and the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And then here's one big indicator as to why John is not a synoptic gospel. It's because approximately 90 to 92% of the material in John is only unique to his gospel, making it non-synoptic. So he's not using of that same viewpoint, of that same eye that's used in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, making it non-synoptic. So with that, this concludes the presentation on the Synoptic Gospels. Surely hope that we have a better understanding as what synoptic means, which Gospels are considered to be synoptic, and why John is not a synoptic gospel. Thank you so much, and God bless.